I was 26 when I realized family first didn't always mean love. It could also mean convenience. My name's Thomas, and if you asked anyone who knows my parents, they'd say we're the kind of family that sticks together. That's what Mom always said at every barbecue, every Christmas dinner, every time she needed to remind everyone how close we supposedly were. But behind those smiling photos and matching sweaters was a hierarchy, a silent one, but very real. My older brother, Eric, was the golden child. And well, I was the spare room. Growing up, Eric could do no wrong. When he failed a class, it was because the teacher didn't like him. When I got an A, it was, good, now help your brother study. When he borrowed Dad's car and got into a fender bender, they replaced it within a week. When I asked to borrow the same car to drive to a job interview, I was told I hadn't earned that kind of trust yet. I wish I could say it didn't bother me, that I brushed it off, but it stung more than I'd ever admit out loud. I worked 2 part-time jobs through college just to stay independent, while Eric bounced between startups and half-hearted business ideas that my parents always invested in. When I finally got a steady job in tech and moved out, I thought I'd escaped the invisible weight of being second place. I rented a small but cozy place about 20 minutes from my parents' house. Still close enough to visit, still far enough to breathe. I'd stop by every few weeks, bring Mom her favorite pastries, maybe fix something around the house that Dad hadn't gotten to. I wasn't doing it for approval anymore. It was just habit. Maybe part of me still hoped they'd notice the effort. But everything started shifting after Eric got married. His wife, Vanessa, had the kind of charm that could win over anyone in 5 minutes. Mom adored her instantly, said she was the daughter she never had. Dad was just happy to have someone who laughed at his bad jokes. I didn't mind her at first. She seemed polite enough. But there was something calculated behind her smile, like she was always keeping score. One night, about a year after their wedding, Mom invited me over for dinner. Just family, she said over the phone. It'll be nice to have everyone together again. I remember she sounded almost too chipper, but I didn't think much of it. Dinner was tense. Not openly hostile, just full of little undercurrents you only notice if you've grown up around them. Vanessa talked nonstop about how expensive their new apartment was, how tiny it felt compared to the homes in the suburbs. Mom nodded sympathetically, refilling her wine glass every few minutes. Dad just smiled, asking about Eric's business plans like he hadn't heard this same vague pitch for the 4th time. I mostly kept quiet, eating my roast beef and trying not to roll my eyes every time Vanessa dropped another humble brag about how hard it was living in the city. Then, halfway through dessert, Mom cleared her throat. "Thomas, we wanted to talk to you about something," she said, her tone suddenly more formal. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Sure," I said slowly. She glanced at Dad, who nodded. "Your brother and Vanessa are having some trouble with their lease. The landlord's being unreasonable, and they need a place to stay for a few months. We thought it would make sense for them to move in here for a while." I nodded. "Okay, that's nice of you." Mom hesitated. "Well, that's the thing. They'd need the guest room." I frowned. "The guest room? Isn't that?" Dad interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "That's your room, yes. So we thought maybe you could stay in the garage for a bit, just until they get back on their feet." For a second, I genuinely thought he was joking. I let out a short laugh. "Wait, you're serious?" Mom's expression didn't change. "It's just temporary, honey. You'll still have your own space, and your father can help set it up nicely. We'll make it comfortable." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "Mom," I said finally, "you're asking me to move into the garage so Eric and Vanessa can take my room?" "They're going through a hard time," she said gently. "And you're single, you don't need much space. You've always been so adaptable." That last word, adaptable, landed like a slap. It was the same thing she used to say when Eric got the new bike and I got his old one. I looked at Dad, hoping for some sign that he'd realize how ridiculous this was. But he just crossed his arms. "This isn't up for discussion, Thomas. Family comes first." The room went quiet. I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the fridge. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, pretending to look at her nails. Eric avoided my eyes. I swallowed hard. "Right," I said. "Family comes first." That night, I packed my things. It wasn't even that I needed the space. I had my own place. It was the principle of it. The way they said it, like it was perfectly normal to ask me to live in the garage while their golden child and his wife played house in my old room. As I carried the last box out to my car, Mom stood by the door, looking sad but not apologetic. "It's just for a little while," she said softly. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "A little while." But something in me shifted that night. I realized that in this family, being kind had always meant being convenient. And for the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to be either. Over the next few months, I kept my distance. Calls went unanswered. Invitations declined. It was easier than pretending things were fine. Mom texted occasionally, usually to ask if I could come fix something around the house. And when I said I was busy, she'd send a passive-aggressive, "Oh, of course, I understand." Then one afternoon, I ran into Vanessa at the grocery store. She was wearing designer sunglasses and talking loudly on her phone. When she spotted me, she smiled like we were old friends. "Thomas, wow, it's been ages. How's life in your little tech world?" "Busy," I said flatly. She laughed. "I bet. Eric's been so stressed lately, you know? The commute from your parents' house is killing him." I raised an eyebrow. "From the free room?" She tilted her head, clearly not catching the sarcasm. "Oh, it's not free. We help around the house. We keep your parents company. We contribute." "Contribute how?" I asked. She blinked, then smiled sweetly. "Emotional support," she said. I didn't even respond. I just grabbed my basket and walked away, her voice fading behind me. But that brief encounter stuck with me. That smug tone, that unshakable confidence that the world would always bend around them. And then came the call. It was a Thursday night when Mom's name popped up on my phone. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Thomas," she began, her voice a little shaky. "We've had some unexpected expenses lately. Eric and Vanessa's situation has been harder than we thought, and we might need a bit of help with the mortgage this month. Just temporary, of course." I froze. "You're asking me for money?" "Not for us," she said quickly. "For the family. You know, to keep things balanced." I laughed quietly. "Balanced? That's one word for it." She sighed. "Don't be difficult, Thomas. You've always been the responsible one." That's when it hit me. I wasn't the responsible one. I was the fallback plan, the safety net, the guy they could always count on to take the hit so the golden child wouldn't have to. I ended the call politely, told her I'd think about it. But when I hung up, I sat there in silence for a long time. My apartment was quiet, the city lights flickering through the blinds, and I realized something that made me smile for the first time that night. I couldn't control how they treated me, but I could control what came next. And what came next would make them finally see me for who I was. Not the backup, not the garage kid, but the one who stopped playing by their rules. Because if family comes first, then maybe it was time to remind them what that really meant. That moment, sitting there in the dim light, phone still warm in my hand, was the first spark of an idea. The kind that starts slow but grows into something unstoppable. And they had no idea what was coming. For a while after that phone call, I tried to keep my distance. It wasn't about holding a grudge. I just needed some air, some peace. But with my family, distance doesn't last long. My mom has this way of making every boundary sound like betrayal. It started small, texts here and there. "Eric's been so stressed with work lately." Or, "Vanessa hasn't been feeling well. Maybe you could stop by and cheer her up." You'd think I was her son's emotional support animal the way she phrased it. I'd usually just reply, "Busy with work, sorry." But then she'd follow up with guilt-laced messages like, "I know your job is important, honey, but family is more important." I remember one Sunday afternoon vividly. I just sat down with my laptop and a cup of coffee when Mom called again. Her voice was unusually cheerful, the kind of tone she used when she was about to ask for something. "Thomas, you'll never guess who's here," she said. I sighed softly. "Who?" "Your brother and Vanessa. We're having a little get-together. You should come over. It'll be fun." I hesitated. "Mom, you know Sundays are my only real day off." "Oh, come on. You're always alone in that apartment. You could use some company. Besides, Eric said he wants to talk to you about something." I should have known that last part was bait. Against my better judgment, I went. When I arrived, Eric's car was parked right in front of the driveway like he owned the place. I walked in through the front door, and it hit me instantly. The smell of Vanessa's perfume mixed with the faint aroma of something burnt in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone, while Mom fluttered around serving appetizers. Eric greeted me with that fake casual smile he always used when he needed something. "Hey man, glad you could make it." "Yeah," I said, hanging my jacket. Mom said you wanted to talk? He chuckled awkwardly. Oh, right. Yeah. We're actually thinking about expanding my business. I almost laughed out loud. His business was a vague social media consulting gig that hadn't made a cent in months. Expanding. I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. Yeah, but we're a little tight on funds right now. We thought maybe you could help out. Just a loan, you know. Family helping family. There it was. The real reason for the invitation. Mom jumped in before I could respond. Thomas, you're doing so well with your job. You have savings, right? This would mean the world to your brother. I stared at her. You're serious? Of course, she said. You've always been the reliable one. That word again. Reliable. The polite way of saying doormat. Eric smiled, clearly assuming I'd say yes. You'd get it back, obviously, once the business takes off. What exactly is the business again? I asked. He blinked. You know, online marketing, social strategy, that kind of thing. I leaned back in my chair. So, nothing. His expression hardened. It's not nothing, Thomas. You wouldn't understand. Mom gasped softly. Boys, please, don't fight. I stood up. I'm not fighting. I'm just not giving you money. The room went silent. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone and smirked. Wow, touchy. I grabbed my jacket. Enjoy your get-together. As I walked out, I heard Mom say under her breath, I don't know what's gotten into him lately. I wish I could say that was the end of it. But with my family, it never ends. It just changes shape. A week later, I got a text from my dad. Come by the house when you can. Need to discuss something. I went the next evening, expecting maybe a talk about Mom being upset or something routine. But when I got there, Dad was waiting in the garage, arms crossed, expression stern. What's this about? I asked. He nodded toward a box in the corner. Those are your old tools, right? Yeah. Well, Eric's been needing some for his project, so we gave them to him. I stared at him. You what? He frowned. You don't use them anymore. They're mine. Don't get dramatic, Thomas. He's your brother. He needed them. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste copper. It wasn't about the tools. It was about the constant assumption that whatever was mine was automatically family property. I left without saying another word. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I realized something unsettling. My family didn't see me as an equal. I was a utility, a placeholder, the one they could rely on until they didn't need me anymore. Still, a small part of me clung to the hope that things might get better. Maybe if I just kept my distance, they'd start respecting me. That hope lasted exactly 2 weeks. Because 2 weeks later, I got a call from my landlord. Hey, Thomas, he said, sounding awkward. Your parents stopped by earlier today. I froze. What? What? They said you asked them to check the place while you were out of town. I let them in since they said they were family. Hope that's okay. I wasn't out of town, and I sure as hell hadn't asked anyone to check my apartment. I drove over to my parents' house that night, fuming. When I walked in, Mom was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine like nothing had happened. Why were you at my apartment? I demanded. She blinked, startled. Oh, Thomas, calm down. We just wanted to make sure everything was fine. Parents worry, you know. You went through my things. Don't be ridiculous, she said. We just looked around. You live alone. It's easy for things to pile up. Dad walked in then, holding a beer. Lower your voice, son. You're overreacting. Overreacting, I said, my voice rising. You entered my apartment without permission. Eric came downstairs right then, conveniently. What's going on? Nothing, Mom said quickly. Your brother's being dramatic. Eric grinned. Again, I could feel the heat rising in my chest. You know what? Forget it, I said. Enjoy your night. As I turned to leave, Mom called after me. We were just trying to help. But that word, help, felt like salt in a wound. Days passed, but I couldn't shake it. The invasion of privacy, the way they dismissed it like it was nothing, it wasn't just about control anymore. It was about ownership. They genuinely believed they had a right to me. Then one morning, out of nowhere, I got another text from Mom. We need to talk. It's important. I ignored it. An hour later, another. Thomas, please. It's about the house. Curiosity got the better of me, so I called her. What's going on? Her voice trembled slightly. Your father's been having some financial trouble. We're behind on a few payments. Eric and Vanessa have been contributing what they can, but it's not enough. I closed my eyes. Mom, before you say no, she interrupted. Just think about it. This is our family home, the one you grew up in. You wouldn't want to see it go under, would you? I hesitated. As much as I resented them, the idea of the house being taken away twisted something inside me. I had good memories there, birthday parties, late-night talks with Dad before things went sour, even quiet mornings with Mom when she used to make pancakes. So I said, I'll think about it. But deep down, I knew what this was. It wasn't about saving the house. It was about saving Eric. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat staring at my ceiling, trying to piece together all the small slights, all the manipulations that had led to this moment. Every time I'd been told to understand, to be patient, to help out. Every time I'd been told family comes first, when what they really meant was Eric comes first. And yet, there was still a part of me, some stubborn piece of the kid who used to fix their fences and repaint their walls, that wanted to believe I could change things. That maybe, if I helped one last time, they'd finally see my worth. But life doesn't reward martyrs. It rewards those who know when to stop being used. A few days later, Mom invited me over for dinner again. I almost didn't go, but she insisted it was important. When I arrived, the house looked different. Cluttered. Boxes everywhere, papers stacked on the dining table. Vanessa was typing something on her laptop while Eric scrolled on his phone. Mom smiled when she saw me. Thomas, you made it. What's going on? I asked. Dad cleared his throat. We've been talking about ways to stabilize things financially. And Eric had an idea. Eric looked up, pretending to be modest. Well, it's just, the house is a big space. Vanessa and I could help take over some of the costs if we had ownership stakes. Ownership, I repeated slowly. Mom jumped in. Just temporarily. You could help cover a few payments. And in exchange, we'd put your name on the deed too. It's a win-win. Something about her tone made my stomach drop. Wait, I said. You're behind on payments, and you want me to bail you out so Eric can get part ownership? It's not like that, Mom said quickly. It's exactly like that, I replied. The silence that followed was heavy. Dad looked down at his plate. Eric looked irritated that I'd seen through it so quickly. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about family. It was about leverage. About making sure I stayed tied to them, financially and emotionally, for as long as possible. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I just stood up, put my napkin down, and said quietly, I'll think about it. But in that moment, something in me hardened. I realized I was done playing defense. They thought I'd always be the one saying yes. The one moving to the garage. The one covering the bills. But they were about to learn that I had limits. And when I reached mine, I didn't just walk away, I planned. Because when they pushed me out of my own room, they thought they'd humiliated me. But what they really did was give me the perfect motivation to change everything. And soon, I'd get the chance. Sooner than they ever expected. I didn't go back to my parents' house for a while after that dinner. Every text from Mom went unanswered, every call sent to voicemail. I needed time to think. The kind of silence that lets your thoughts settle and the truth crawl out from under all the excuses you've been feeding yourself. I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn a kind of love that was never conditional on effort. It was conditional on obedience. I kept telling myself that maybe I was exaggerating, that maybe they were just stressed. But deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't see me as their son anymore. I was their contingency plan. It had been about a month of radio silence when Mom showed up at my apartment. No warning, no text, nothing. I opened the door, and there she was, holding a Tupperware of lasagna like she'd just dropped by for coffee. Thomas, you're impossible to reach lately, she said with a forced laugh. Yeah, I said, not moving to let her in. I've been busy. Her smile faltered. I can see that. Well, I thought I'd bring you something. You've lost weight. I'm fine, Mom. She sighed, pushing past me before I could stop her. I just want to talk, that's all. I closed the door slowly. About what? She turned to face me, clasping her hands. You know your father and I love you, right? I almost laughed. That's one way to start a serious conversation. She frowned. Don't be sarcastic. We've always tried to do what's best for the family. You might not agree with every decision, but you'll understand one day when you have children of your own. Get to the point, Mom. She hesitated, then said, we had to make a decision about the house. I felt my chest tighten. What kind of decision? She looked away, suddenly very interested in the lasagna. We refinanced it. It was the only way to manage the debt. Eric helped with the process. Okay, I said slowly. So what does that have to do with me? She hesitated again, then sighed. We had to use your name on part of the paperwork. Just temporarily. For a second, I didn't even understand what she meant. What do you mean? Use my name. She started talking fast. It's nothing serious. Just a small cosign. Eric assured us it would make the approval process easier since your credit is better than ours. You know how hard it's been for your father to get approvals since retirement. I felt the blood drain from my face. You use my credit? It's not like that. Did you forge my signature? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze. That silence told me everything. I took a step back. Oh my God, you actually did it. It's only temporary, she said quickly. And Eric's taking care of the payments. You won't even notice. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. It was the kind that comes right before something inside you breaks. Do you even hear yourself, Mom? That's fraud. Don't be dramatic, Thomas, she said, her voice rising defensively. You're making it sound like we robbed a bank. You forged my name, I said, my voice shaking. That's exactly what you did. She crossed her arms. We're family. It's not like we'd do anything to hurt you. Are you serious right now? I said. That's your excuse? That because we're family, you can commit fraud in my name. Her expression hardened. You're overreacting. We did this for you. For all of us. If we lose the house, where would we go? You could have just asked me. I shouted. Her voice cracked. And what would you have said? I didn't answer. Because I knew she was right. I would have said no. And that made me feel even worse. She must have sensed my silence because her tone softened. You've always been the responsible one, Thomas. We knew you'd understand eventually. That word again, responsible. It felt like a curse now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I want to see the documents. She hesitated. They're at home. Then I'll come by tonight. Her face paled slightly. There's no need. Eric's handling everything. Then I'll talk to Eric. She reached for my arm. Thomas, please don't make a scene. It'll just make things worse. I pulled away. You already made things worse. That night, I drove straight to my parents' house. My hands were shaking the entire time. Every rational part of my brain told me to calm down, to gather information before losing it, but I couldn't. The thought that they'd used my name, my credit, my identity without even asking. It was like finding out your family had robbed you while smiling to your face. When I got there, the house was quiet except for the sound of the TV. Dad was in his recliner, half asleep, while Eric was sitting at the dining table with a laptop. He looked up when he saw me. Hey, what's up? Where's the paperwork? I said flatly. He blinked. What paperwork? The refinancing documents, I said. The ones with my name on them. He paused just a little too long before saying, Mom told you, huh? Yeah, she did. So I'll ask again, where are they? He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Thomas, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a formality. You forged my signature, I said. He rolled his eyes. It's not like you were going to say yes anyway. I froze. You what? He shrugged. You're always so uptight about everything. We needed a quick solution, and Mom said you wouldn't mind. You forged my name, I repeated, my voice low now. He stood up, his own tone turning defensive. Oh, come on. Don't act like this is the end of the world. We'll keep up with the payments. It's not like it'll affect you. Do you even realize what could happen if you miss one payment? I said, it's my credit on the line. My name on that loan. He scoffed. You're being so dramatic. Not everything's about you. I laughed, cold, bitter, hollow. You're unbelievable. At that point, Dad stirred and looked over. What's going on? Your son committed fraud? I said without hesitation. Eric groaned. There he goes again. Dad frowned. Thomas, calm down. What are you talking about? They used my name on a loan application without my permission, I said. That's fraud, Dad. Dad's face darkened. Watch your tone. We're all under a lot of stress right now. I stared at him, stunned. You knew? He looked away. That silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I turned to Eric. You're going to undo it. Tomorrow. I want my name off that paperwork. He smirked. You can't just undo it, genius. It's already filed. My heart pounded in my chest. Then you'd better find a way. He stepped closer. You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you have a decent job and a little apartment. You've always acted like you're above the family. I stared at him, disbelief curdling into anger. You used me, and you're still trying to make me feel guilty about it. Mom came in just then, holding her phone. What's going on here? I turned to her. You forged my signature. You all did. She sighed, looking tired. Thomas, please. Not in front of your father. Not in front of my. I started laughing again, but there was no humor left in it. You can't even admit what you did. Enough, Dad shouted suddenly, slamming his hand on the armrest. You're not going to talk to your mother that way. I'm not going to let my family destroy my credit and act like it's fine, I shot back. Mom's voice cracked. We did what we had to do. For the family. I took a long breath, my hands trembling. You keep saying that like it excuses everything. But it doesn't. Not this time. I turned to leave, but Eric's voice stopped me. You're not going anywhere until you calm down. I looked at him, then at my parents. The three of them standing there, united in silence. It hit me then. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. They'd chosen him again. They'd always choose him. I walked out without another word. The drive home was a blur. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I felt numb, and yet my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. How could they do that? How could my own parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, put me in legal jeopardy just to protect my brother's comfort? When I got back to my apartment, I didn't even turn the lights on. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the faint glow of the city outside. I kept hearing Mom's voice in my head. Family comes first. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe legal advice. Maybe just something to make me feel less powerless. I ended up reading for hours about forged documents, cosigner liability, credit fraud. And the more I read, the more the shock began to turn into something sharper. Not rage. Not revenge. Something colder. Resolve. Because if they were willing to use my name for their mess, then they'd also have to face the consequences. And this time, I wouldn't be cleaning up after them. This time, I'd be the one writing the story. And they had no idea how far I was willing to go. The week after that confrontation felt like falling through fog. Nothing made sense at first. One day I was furious. The next I felt hollow, like the anger had burned through everything inside me and left nothing but ash. I kept going to work, but my focus was shot. My coworkers noticed. My manager asked if I was okay, and I just said I was dealing with family stuff. That was the safest phrase for something too complicated to explain. At night, I'd come home, sit on the couch with the TV playing in the background, and stare at the ceiling. My phone kept lighting up, texts from Mom, missed calls from Eric, even one from Dad that just said, "We need to talk. Don't make this worse than it already is. Make it worse." That's what they always said when I stopped doing what they wanted. Eventually, I stopped answering altogether. I figured they'd leave me alone. But people like my family don't know how to leave things alone. They just find new ways to twist them. It started with a letter from the bank. At first, I thought it was junk mail, until I noticed the envelope had the name of my parents' mortgage company. I tore it open, and my heart sank. It wasn't addressed to my parents. It was addressed to me. It was a notice of late payment. 2 months overdue. I sat there staring at the paper, rereading it like maybe I'd gotten it wrong. But no, my name, my address, my signature printed on the documents. I felt sick. They weren't keeping up with the payments. And now it was my credit on the line. I called the bank the next morning. I didn't want to, but I needed to know exactly how bad it was. After being passed around from one department to another, I finally reached someone in lending who looked up the file. "Yes, Mr. Green," the woman said, her voice polite but distant. "You're listed as a cosigner. There have been 2 missed payments, and a third is due next week. Can I remove myself from the loan?" I asked, knowing the answer before she even said it. Unfortunately, not without a full refinance. Both primary and cosigner parties would need to consent, meaning I was stuck unless my parents agreed. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling. It wasn't just frustration, it was helplessness. The kind that crawls under your skin and makes you feel like no matter what you do, you're trapped in someone else's mess. I thought about driving to their house again, but what would that solve? They'd just talk circles around me, twist my anger into guilt, make me feel like I was the one being selfish. Instead, I went for a walk. It was cold out, the kind of cold that makes you feel both awake and numb at the same time. I walked through the park, past couples and families and kids playing, and for the first time, I realized how quiet my life was, how small it had become, revolving around work and responsibilities and keeping the peace. I'd been raised to believe that being the good one meant sacrificing quietly, but all that had ever done was make me easy to use. Still, walking away felt impossible. I didn't want to cut off my parents. They were my parents. But every time I thought about what they'd done, I felt that same tightness in my chest, that same dizzy disbelief. I went home that night and poured myself a glass of water, then sat on the couch and opened my laptop again. I pulled up my credit report. It was worse than I thought. The delinquent payments had already been recorded. My score had dropped almost 80 points in a month. I just sat there, staring at the numbers. It felt like my entire future was being quietly dismantled by the people who claimed to love me most. That's when my phone buzzed again, another call from Mom. I ignored it. Then she texted, "Thomas, please, this isn't how family treats each other." I almost laughed. Then, before I could stop myself, I typed back, "Exactly." No response. For the next few days, I kept to myself. I barely ate. I'd go to work, come home, fall asleep on the couch with my laptop still open. I wasn't depressed, not exactly. It was more like being emptied out. Like I'd hit a point where even anger felt pointless. But one night, I got another knock on my door. It was Eric. He stood there with that same smug, slightly fake smile. "Hey man, can we talk?" I crossed my arms. "You've got 30 seconds. Come on," he said, laughing like I was being ridiculous. "Don't be like that. I just wanted to clear the air." Clear the air. I repeated. "You forged my signature, wrecked my credit, and dragged me into your debt. What's left to clear?" He sighed, glancing around like he expected an audience. "You always make things sound worse than they are. Look, the late payments were just a hiccup. Vanessa's been between jobs and—" "Stop," I said sharply. "I don't care about Vanessa's job. I care about you fixing this." His jaw tightened. "You're not the only one struggling, Thomas. We're all doing our best. But Mom's been really upset about how cold you've been." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is Mom okay? Did it hurt her feelings that she committed fraud and I didn't send her flowers afterward?" His face darkened. "You're so dramatic, man. You act like we killed someone. You didn't have to. You just ruined my financial future. But sure, same thing." He sighed. "You've always had this victim complex. You think everything's about you. You've got a good job, a nice apartment. What's one little signature compared to everything Mom and Dad did for you?" I stared at him, stunned by how natural the manipulation came to him. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" I said, "Get out." He looked at me for a long second, like he wanted to say something else, but then he just shrugged and walked away. "You'll regret being like this, you know," he said over his shoulder. Family doesn't forget who turns their back. When I shut the door behind him, I leaned against it for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. That was the moment I realized something important. I was already the villain in their story. No matter what I did, they'd twist it. If I helped, I was a pushover. If I didn't, I was selfish. There was no version of this where I came out the good son. So maybe it was time to stop trying to be one. The next morning, I took a personal day from work. I went to a lawyer's office downtown, an older guy named Phillips who handled financial disputes and fraud cases. I didn't even know what to say at first. I just handed him the bank letter and the loan documents. He skimmed through them, his brow furrowing. "This is your signature?" "No," I said. "Then you need to file a report immediately. This is identity fraud, plain and simple." I hesitated. "They're my parents." He looked up at me over his glasses. "That doesn't change what it is." I sat there, silent. The thought of reporting them made me sick. But so did doing nothing. "Can I fix the credit issue without pressing charges?" I asked. He exhaled. "Technically, yes, but the bank will need to verify that you didn't consent. That usually requires a police report. Otherwise, they'll assume you were involved." I nodded slowly. My throat felt dry. Mr. Phillips leaned back in his chair. "If I can give you one piece of advice, son, blood doesn't give anyone the right to ruin your life." That sentence stuck with me for days. I didn't go to the police, not yet. I wasn't ready to cross that line. But I did start documenting everything. Every text, every letter, every email from the bank. I made copies, took photos, organized them in a folder on my computer. And for the first time, instead of reacting, I started thinking. I didn't have a plan yet, just a direction. A quiet one. I started reading up on property laws, mortgage transfers, cosigner rights. I even called a real estate agent friend from college to ask hypothetical questions. At first, it was just to understand what I was up against. But slowly, an idea began to take shape. Something small at first, then bigger. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even let myself think it all the way through yet. But it was there, a spark under all the rubble. Meanwhile, my parents kept calling. Sometimes mom's voice would break on voicemail, saying things like, "We just want you to come home for dinner," or "Eric's been trying so hard to fix this. Can't you just forgive him?" Other times, it was colder. "You're making a scene. The bank called us asking questions. You're embarrassing the family." It was like they couldn't decide whether to guilt me or shame me, so they just alternated. I started saving the voicemails too. Every time I felt that old pull of guilt, the urge to call them back, to fix things, I'd listen to those recordings. The pity in her tone, the entitlement under it, the quiet assumption that I'd eventually cave. I didn't. Weeks passed. My credit score stayed low, my stress high, and my sleep almost non-existent. But beneath all that exhaustion was something steady, a slow, simmering patience. For once, I wasn't reacting to them. I was waiting for the right moment. Then one evening, while I was sorting through more paperwork, I got another letter, this time from a real estate management company. It was addressed to Eric Green. Apparently, he and Vanessa had applied to rent a house across town. A big one, way out of their budget. And the irony? They'd used my parents as guarantors. That was when I knew. They weren't learning their lesson. They weren't even slowing down. They were just moving their bad habits somewhere else. And my parents would follow them off a cliff if it meant keeping the family together. That night, I poured myself a drink and stared out the window for a long time. The city lights flickered on one by one. My reflection stared back, tired, sharper around the edges, but not broken. This was rock bottom. And it wasn't the kind you crawl out of by begging. It was the kind you climb out of quietly, with purpose. Because I'd finally accepted something. My parents didn't just betray me. They'd shown me exactly how far they were willing to go. Now it was my turn to decide how far I was willing to go. And I already knew the answer. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that it doesn't always feel like one dramatic crash. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, like watching your reflection fade out piece by piece until you realize there's nothing left but resolve. I'd spent my whole life reacting to my family's chaos. That week, for the first time, I started building something of my own. It started with small, deliberate steps. I went to the gym before work, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to feel control over something again. I cut out late-night scrolling, started reading every night instead, books about finance, property, personal development. I wasn't trying to heal. I was preparing. At work, I threw myself into projects I'd been avoiding. My boss noticed. Within a month, I landed a promotion, senior project manager, with a substantial raise. It wasn't just about the title. It was about proving to myself that my life wasn't defined by their mess. I had built something on my own, something real. The irony was that as I rose higher, my family's chaos became background noise. Mom's texts slowed down. Eric stopped trying to call. It was like they'd all collectively decided I was the difficult one and quietly cut me out. And honestly, that silence was the best thing that ever happened to me. With the promotion came a bonus, not huge, but enough to make me start thinking bigger. I met with a financial advisor. We talked about credit repair, long-term investments, property ownership. I told him what had happened. Well, the short version. He winced and said, "You'll recover, but it's going to take time. If you really want to protect yourself, start building assets in your own name." That stuck with me. So I did. I started small, a used car under my own financing to rebuild credit. Then, a few months later, I found a 2-bedroom condo in a good neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I spent weekends furnishing it slowly, carefully. No hand-me-downs, no family furniture. Every item had purpose. Every corner felt like freedom. I even hung a framed quote on the wall above my desk. Family doesn't end in blood, and loyalty doesn't start there either. But success has a funny way of echoing. When things finally started going right, that's when they came back. The first hint was a voicemail from Mom. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered, almost rehearsed. "Thomas, honey, it's been a while. We've all missed you so much. Your brother's business is really taking off now. You should come by and see the new setup. We'd love to have dinner together." I didn't call back. A few days later, another message. "I heard you bought a new place. That's wonderful. Your father and I are so proud of you. Maybe we could come see it sometime." Pride. That was rich. Then came the guilt angle. "Thomas, we're family. Whatever happened, we can fix it. Don't let something silly come between us." Something silly. I remember staring at my phone, reading that text, and laughing out loud. Still, I didn't respond. And then, 3 months later, I got a letter from the bank again. Not about the fraud this time, but about the house. It had been foreclosed. They'd lost it. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for them. But another part, the part that had spent months scraping my life back together, felt nothing but a cold, quiet sense of inevitability. They'd built everything on manipulation, and eventually, the foundation cracked. I didn't reach out. Not when the foreclosure hit. Not when they moved into a rental house across town. Not when Eric tried to post inspirational quotes on Facebook about starting over stronger. I just stayed focused. That's when opportunity found me. A coworker named Alex, who'd become a close friend, told me about an investment property going up for sale, a modest two-story house near the outskirts of the city. It's been mismanaged, he said. Tenants left, the owner's desperate. You could probably get it below market value. I checked the listing out of curiosity and froze. The address was familiar. It was the house my parents and Eric were renting. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But when I looked closer, there it was. The same street, same layout, same front porch with the uneven step I used to trip on as a kid. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. My pulse was steady, but my thoughts were racing. I hadn't planned on revenge. I'd planned on peace. But sometimes life hands you both. Still, I didn't act impulsively. I met with Alex's contact, a realtor who specialized in foreclosed and rental transition properties. We talked numbers, strategy, legal processes. I didn't mention the personal connection. To him, it was just another deal. After a week of paperwork, inspections, and negotiations, I made an offer, low but fair. And within 2 weeks, it was accepted. Just like that, the house I grew up in, the house my parents had lost, the house Eric and Vanessa were renting, belonged to me. It didn't feel like triumph. Not yet. It felt heavy, like holding something that used to mean everything, only to realize it never really belonged to you in the first place. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even drive by for a few days. I wanted time to process it. But when I finally did, it hit me like a wave. The place looked smaller somehow, like the memories had outgrown the walls. The shutters were faded, the lawn unkept. There was a dent in the mailbox from when Eric backed into it years ago. I sat there in my car for a long time, engine running, just watching the porch light flicker. Then I saw Mom through the window, carrying a tray of food to the dining table. Dad was sitting in his recliner, Eric's voice faintly audible through the open window. It was surreal, like watching a movie I'd already seen 100 times. For a moment, I felt that old ache, the one that whispered, maybe you should forgive them. Maybe you can start over. But then I remembered the forged signature, the missed payments, the way they'd looked at me that night, like I was the problem for not letting them ruin my life quietly. No, this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about closure. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly behind the scenes. I met with a property manager to handle the transition. The existing tenants, my parents and brother, were on a short-term lease. I didn't interfere. Not yet. I spent that time putting my life fully in order. I paid off my smaller debts, rebuilt my credit another 40 points, and expanded my investment portfolio. Work was thriving. I'd been promoted again, leading a new department. My boss called me methodical, steady, the guy who always delivers. Funny how the same traits that made me the family's punching bag turned me into the company's backbone. In my free time, I started volunteering at a community tech workshop. Teaching coding basics to teens felt surprisingly rewarding. Maybe because it reminded me that helping people didn't have to mean being used by them. Slowly, I built a new kind of peace. A quieter one. Until the day I got an email from the property manager. Lease renewal period approaching for current tenants at address. Would you like to renew or adjust terms? I stared at the message for a long time. That was the moment everything came full circle. Because the same house where I'd been told family comes first, the same house I'd been pushed out of, was now legally mine. And the people who had once kicked me into the garage were about to learn what that phrase really meant. But I wasn't rushing it. I wasn't angry anymore. In fact, I'd never felt calmer. Because revenge, real revenge, doesn't come from rage. It comes from balance. From making things right without ever raising your voice. I drafted a reply to the property manager. Professional, polite, detached. Then I hit send. And as I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight spilling across my desk, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving my family's decisions. I was directing them. And this time, the lesson was going to be permanent. Buying the house had been the hard, boring part. The setup, the invisible scaffolding I'd built while everyone else was busy spending other people's money, was the easy, satisfying one. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't march in with a bullhorn or plaster. I told you so all over the mailboxes. I used paperwork, patience, and the one thing they'd never respected in me, rules. First, I covered my bases. I met with Mr. Phillips again and explained exactly what I planned to do. We went over landlord-tenant law, notice periods, what the property manager could and couldn't do, and, most importantly, how to make sure every step was airtight so there was no room for the family's usual emotional blackmail to turn into a legal snafu. I had the bank letters, the delinquency notices, the text messages. I'd documented everything since the signature revelation. That quiet file on my laptop? It was the only kind of ammunition I wanted to use. Next, I set things up practically. I hired a reputable property manager and made sure the rental agreement my parents and Eric had signed previously had expired. They were on a month-to-month after the foreclosure shuffle. The manager inspected the property, noted deferred maintenance they'd ignored for months, and proposed a fair market rate lease for the area. I asked for a standard renewal notification with one tweak, an adjustment to reflect market rates and the fact that the house had been neglected under their tenancy. I didn't inflate figures out of spite. I priced it to be clear, defendable, and, frankly, unavoidable. When the renewal notice went out, it was professional, sterile, no drama, no taunts, just the landlord's paperwork laying out options. Sign the new lease at the adjusted rent, or provide notice to vacate within the legal period. The manager did the delivery to preserve distance. I didn't want my face in the negotiation. My role was simply ownership. My only emotional investment was that everything be by the book. I slept badly the first night after the notices were sent, not from second-guessing, but because the quiet felt like an animal holding its breath. Then the call started. Mom texted first, pleading about the house, about the mortgage, about how could you. I ignored the texts and let the property manager handle the exchanges. That was part of the point. Remove the opportunity for manipulation. It isn't that I didn't care, it's that I finally cared for myself first. A week later, the property manager called me into his office. They want a meeting, he said. They're panicked. Your mother is in tears. Eric is threatening all sorts of. He stopped, looking at me to see how much of the family melodrama I wanted him to share. Keep it factual, I said. Tell them the options again. Offer a reasonable timeline. Give them a path to stay if they want it. I didn't say the words out loud, but this was the crux. I wanted them to feel the practical consequences of their choices, not the moral lectures they'd always weaponized against me. They came to the meeting nervous and defiant in equal measure. Mom cried. Dad tried to charm. Eric alternated between bluster and sobbing. Vanessa, as practiced as ever, folded sympathy and entitlement into a single expression. They pleaded. They promised. They asked me to remember family. They offered to pay more gradually, to help with repairs, to sign a long-term lease. Anything that sounded like commitment, but would still let them keep the place without taking responsibility for the mess they'd created. I set out a simple, legal option list, calm and businesslike. Sign the lease at the new rate, show proof of payment for the first month and security deposit within 7 days, and enroll in a property upkeep plan with verified payments, or provide notice and vacate by the legal deadline. There was a final line I didn't write anywhere official but said aloud. If you don't choose either, I'll have no choice but to pursue all remedies available under the lease. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement. When I told them the new monthly figure, Vanessa's mouth went into a small, surprised, "Oh." Mom's face went white. Eric sputtered. "We can't," he started, then stopped because numbers don't care about excuses. That night Mom called. She was sobbing, asking what she had done to deserve this. How could I be so cruel? Wasn't I his son? I listened. I let her have the monologue she'd used on me for years, the one that always ended with family comes first. When she paused, I said the thing that had been sitting cold and perfect in my chest since the day they'd told me to move into the garage. Family comes first, remember? She went quiet. For the first time in years, there was no immediate attempt to twist my words, just a raw, stunned silence. It was the exact echo of the line Dad had used on me the night they kicked me into the garage. Hearing it reflected back at them, with the literal implications of ownership and legal obligation attached, had a weight I hadn't expected. It landed differently when it wasn't rhetorical. A day later, the manager delivered the formal notice. They had 7 days to commit to the new terms with proof of funds or to give 30 days notice to vacate. The paperwork was clean. The language was clear. No drama. No theatrics. Just consequences. And then the call I'd been bracing for arrived. Eric, voice low and urgent, accused me of being petty and cruel. He said I was making their problems worse, that I didn't understand sacrifice. He warned me about family reputation, about things that sounded, in that clipped tone, oddly like the veiled legal threats he'd learned to throw around. But against the ledger of bank letters, against the stack of messages where my name had been used like an entry on a list, his warnings were hollow. The next morning, Mom showed up at my door, mascara smudged, clutching a grocery bag like some fragile peace offering. She begged. She cried. She said things I'd heard before, but the words were different now. Less about guilt, more about consequence. I felt a flash of the old urge to fix everything for everyone. It passed like wind across the room. I told her, simply, that there were options on the table and that I'd given them every chance to choose. Her eyes searched mine for the old son who would have blinked and said yes. I didn't blink. She left without agreeing to anything. And as the door closed, I realized the strangest thing. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight wasn't gone. The bank notices were still a problem. The credit ding still stung. But the obligation to silently absorb their mistakes had lifted. I had turned the power imbalance into leverage not to humiliate them, but to force real accountability. The lease and the notices were merely instruments of that change. Then, late in the afternoon, an email from the property manager popped up. A formal signed acknowledgement had been received. Not from my parents, from Vanessa. She'd signed a temporary agreement at the new rate. The security deposit slipped to the manager via a third party, and a message attached read, in part, that they would make arrangements and work things out. It was a small victory, clinical and measured, a legal foothold, a confirmation that my ownership meant something more than symbolism. It meant authority and a pathway to resolving what they'd broken. It meant they now had to live with the practical fallout of choices they had made for years. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, looking at that email, I felt the old twinge of unease. Vanessa's involvement via a third party smelled like damage control. Eric's insistence on keeping appearances suggested they were not done manipulating. And there was a part of me that couldn't shake how easily they'd slide from tears to schemes. I sat back, hands folded, and watched the sunset through my window. The revenge had been executed cleanly, quiet, legal, and fundamentally fair. I'd done what I'd set out to do. I'd put the power where it belonged and removed the easy loopholes they'd exploited. But as the sky dimmed, a new thought crept in, unwelcome and sharp. Doing it by the book didn't mean there wouldn't be fallout. They were not the sort to accept consequences gracefully. The phone buzzed on the table. It was Mom again. Her name on the screen looked smaller by degrees I couldn't explain. I considered not picking up. Then I answered. Her voice was small and raw. "Thomas, we just need time. Please, can you give us time?" she whispered. I looked at the signed acknowledgement from Vanessa, at the bank letters, at the property manager's notes lined up like dominoes I'd set and pushed. I thought of all the nights I'd slept on couches, of the garage, of the way family comes first had been used as a weapon. "Time," I said slowly, tasting the coolness of the single word. "I can give you a little, but it has to be real. No more lies. No more using my name." There was a long pause on the line. Then Mom said, voice trembling, "We'll do whatever it takes." I wanted to believe her. I wanted, more than anything, to call her bluff and watch them scramble honestly. But experience had taught me their promises usually came with strings. And then, before I could decide what to say next, there was a sharp knock at my front door. Not the polite rhythm of a neighbor, but the hard, decisive three that felt like an ending or a beginning. I stood, phone still in hand, and realized I had no idea whether the next person to step in would be carrying acceptance or a new kind of storm. It wasn't the police at my door. It was the property manager, folder in hand, face set in that apologetic expression professionals wear when they've seen too much human drama. He handed me a paper. "They've refused to vacate," he said. "We'll need to begin the eviction process." I took the folder. "Follow procedure," I said. "Every letter of it." He nodded. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I looked him in the eye. They forged my name. They destroyed my credit. They told me to live in a garage. Yes, I'm sure. The process wasn't fast. That was the beauty of it. It moved in slow, careful steps that gave everyone time to understand what was really happening. First came the official 3-day notice to pay or quit. Then the 30-day termination letter. Then the court filing. I stayed invisible through all of it. No calls, no messages, no visits. Just paperwork moving silently through the system like gravity doing its work. When the court date came, they showed up late, arguing in the hallway before the hearing even started. Eric tried to charm the judge, talking about miscommunication within the family. Vanessa brought a folder of photos of the house, trying to imply they were maintaining it lovingly. Mom sat in the back row, eyes red, while Dad kept glancing at me, like one fatherly look might still guilt me into surrender. But the documentation was ironclad. Copies of the forged signatures, the foreclosure record, the new purchase deed in my name, the signed lease they'd defaulted on. The judge read silently for a long time, then looked at Eric. You were aware you were renting from your brother? Eric swallowed. We didn't realize at first. The judge raised a hand. You signed a lease with his management company. That's legally binding. You're behind on payments. Unless there's evidence of improper conduct, the law's clear. There was a pause so heavy you could feel the air thicken. Judgment for the plaintiff, the judge said. Vacate within 14 days. Mom gasped quietly. Eric's jaw tightened. Vanessa's composure cracked just enough to show panic beneath the gloss. Dad just stared at the floor. They shuffled out of the courtroom in silence. I didn't follow. I waited 10 minutes, then stepped out into the afternoon sun, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, but balance. 2 weeks later, I drove by the house for the last time. The front lawn was empty now, except for a broken garden gnome and a stack of cardboard boxes left by the curb. The curtains were gone. The windows were dark. For the first time since childhood, that house wasn't full of noise or expectation or guilt. It was just a structure, wood, brick, and silence. My property manager had arranged for a cleaning crew and new locks. He handed me the keys that morning, smiling. Officially yours, free and clear. I walked inside and stood in what used to be the dining room. I could still see it the way it used to be. Mom at the head of the table, Dad reading the paper, Eric talking too loudly, me quietly helping to clear plates. It was strange how nostalgia could coexist with relief. I went upstairs to my old room. The walls were still faintly the same shade of blue I'd painted as a teenager. In the corner, near the window, was the outline where my old desk used to be. I stood there for a long time, listening to the stillness. Then I opened the window, let the cold air in, and finally said it out loud, to no one in particular. It's over. A month later, I rented the house out to a young couple expecting their first child. They were polite, steady, and paid early every month. The yard was kept immaculate. Flowers grew again by the porch. The place had a new life now, one not built on guilt or manipulation, but on clean contracts and clear boundaries. As for my family, they scattered. Mom and Dad moved into a small apartment 2 towns over. The last I heard, Dad had picked up part-time work at a local hardware store. Mom called once, months later, to tell me they were getting by, and that she hoped I was happy. Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. Eric and Vanessa didn't last long after that. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that she'd left him after he racked up more debt under her name. He tried to start another consulting venture, but with his credit wrecked and his reputation gone, no one would invest. He sent me one email, half apology, half justification, and I never replied. I didn't need to. The last thread between us snapped quietly one evening when I got another envelope from the bank. This time with my name alone, no co-signer, no warnings, no hidden strings. Just a statement showing my accounts in good standing. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at it, thinking of all the years I tried to earn their respect, all the times I'd traded peace for approval. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate required energy, and they'd taken enough of that already. What I felt was colder, steadier, and infinitely more satisfying: closure. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into a folder marked resolved. Then I poured myself a drink, stood by the window of my condo, and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, my family was learning the same lesson I had, just in reverse. That respect isn't given by birthright. It's earned by boundaries. And as I raised the glass to my reflection, I said it one last time, softly but certain, the words that had haunted me for years and finally belonged to me. Family comes first, but only when they deserve the place.